The Cuphead Show's second season came out not too long ago, and it started in a very interesting place. Specifically, prison. This got us thinking about the fact that throughout the entirety of the Cuphead show, many crimes were committed by Cuphead and co. But while Cuphead and Mugman were sentenced for their crimes, seemingly without a trial, we got to wondering, what if they did stand trial and not just for what they were caught for? So, we rewatched the entire show and found all their crimes so we can properly sentence them. I'm Caleb with Wicked Binge, and this is Sentencing the Cuphead Show characters for their crimes. A couple of caveats before we get started. While Cuphead and Mugman's ages are unknown, we will be sentencing them as adults because they end up in adult prison during the show. Secondly, Inkwell Isle is not a real place, so we'll be utilizing American sentencing standards and crime definitions. Thirdly, due to many states having different laws, we'll be utilizing California standards to calculate these. Finally, we'll be assuming that these characters actually stand trial and don't find some way to get out of it. Also worth noting is we'll be sticking to modern laws, at least for the most part. So with that out of the way, let's get started by sentencing our heroes. We'll be talking about the titular character first, impugning the crimes of Cuphead. Cuphead is the main character of the Cuphead show, but despite this, he has a laundry list of crimes to rattle off. Within mere moments of the first episode, he's already committing destruction of property and assault with a deadly weapon. Because no matter what you say, that paint cannon is definitely a deadly weapon. Even some of his lesser crimes are nothing to scoff at. We've counted 3 counts of reckless endangerment, 1 count of public indecency, and 7 counts of trespassing. If you want to be uncharitable, he has 12 counts of involuntary manslaughter, mostly from the sinking boat in episode 3 and Bullboy's explosion in season 2, and 11 unique counts of destruction of property, with 2 of his 12 counts being repeated, the aforementioned fence destruction. But his worst crimes are his 7 counts of domestic terrorism, by sowing fear, panic, and terror amongst the population during his and Mugman's scam of being ghost catchers. His other major crime we need to talk about is a bit of a weird one, and that is use of a biological weapon. This comes mostly from the episode Root Pact, where he utilizes, knowingly, Ollie's weakness for sad stories to cause him to peel and cause the entire party to cry because of the chemicals he excretes when peeling.
You just had to start blubbering, didn't ya?
This alone carries a minimum of 25 years in prison with a maximum of life. So, looking at all of the facts of the case, we've decided that Cuphead should spend the rest of his life in prison. Cuphead is a non-violent offender for the most part. Whilst he does have a few attempted murder charges under his belt, those were mostly in defense. Hence why he shouldn't be given any sort of death penalty, but that doesn't mean he gets off scot-free. With a similar list of crimes under his belt, Mugman is the next one on trial. Mugman is an interesting one because he shares a lot of crimes with Cuphead, mostly because the two do almost everything together. Because of this, Mugman shares one of Cuphead's worst crimes: the use of a biological weapon on a crowd of people. Much like Cuphead, however, we won't be going over every crime he's committed, just give off some of the heavy hitters and lowballs to give you an idea of what he's done. He's picked up 6 trespassing charges as well as 6 charges for destruction of property. Unlike Cuphead, he picked up 4 charges of criminal accessory, where he wasn't the main perpetrator but was part of the crime nonetheless. Mugman is also special because he is one of the only ones on this list to have a harassment charge, specifically when he harassed the mailman.
What you need is a new brother.
This carries a couple of punishments: a restraining order of up to 5 years, up to $10,000 $100,000 and sometimes 3 years in prison. Finally, the biggest knock against Mugman is that he has 4 charges for attempted murder. Sure, one of those is of Werner Werman, a varmint who is trying to take the cabin they live in, but the other 3 times are not that. He threatens to kill Cuphead twice, once with a falling piano and the second by launching him into the air with a firework. But not only that, he also attempts to kill the ice cream man because his music was loud and his hat was crooked. Mugman has a surprising and severe violent streak that leads us to think that, unlike Cuphead, he should be sentenced to the death penalty. And based on the fact that we see it used in the show, the electric chair seems the most logical. However, we are willing to admit that Mugman may be able to get out of this by pleading insanity. Each of his attempted murder charges, beyond Werner, could be considered done under extraneous circumstances or through the veil of psychosis. The show's most well-known grifter, but still a hero, our next trial is that of Miss Chalice. Chalice is a spirit of some kind that takes on a human form, and apparently grifts in many places based on the fact that she told the cops that she doesn't usually stay in one place for this long. This implies that her list of crimes is longer than what we see in the show, but based on solely what we see, this is what we've listed. 1 charge for trespassing, 1 for theft, and another for burglary. She also has 1 charge of reckless endangerment. We also noticed 2 different cases of Grand Theft Auto and joyriding. One's from when she steals the taxi and another from Kettle's car. These 2 cases also include driving without a license because we cannot confirm she has one, and based on what we know about her, she likely doesn't. Another of her unique cases is her 2 cases of battery. In California, where we're judging these cases, battery is defined as any intentional and unlawful physical contact on another person. We've defined the times she's possessed Cuphead and Mugman as batteries because it seems to have caused physical pain and was done without consent. She's also committed acts of panhandling and obstruction of traffic, not to mention her 11 cases of robbery. But the final crime of hers we will mention is inciting a mob, which happens during the 2nd episode of Season 2, although she does manage to get them to leave. We've decided that while she has a pretty extensive rap sheet, we sentence her to 55 years in prison, with possibility of parole. Despite her long and extensive list of crimes, none of her crimes are especially violent. Even most of her robberies are through coercion rather than violence or force. So we believe that she could still enter society if she satisfies the parole board. Even the old man isn't exempt because the final hero on the docket is Elder Kettle. Much like Chalice, it's implied he's done much more than what we see, but what we do see doesn't bode well for Kettle. He's on the docket with 1 case of reckless endangerment due to using such strong dynamite near Cuphead and Mugman, as well as 1 case of assault with a deadly weapon when he attempted to harm the cops with a fire poker. He has at least 2 cases of arson of property by burning down billboards. He says he burnt all of them, but we can only confirm 2.
You saw nothing!
He has 1 charge for his use of booby traps in the episode Dirt Nap and 5 cases of assault, usually on Cuphead and Mugman, which if they were children would constitute child abuse, but we are assuming they aren't. As for unique crimes that Kettle has committed, he briefly has a case of false imprisonment when he held Cuphead in a cupboard for a bit, although Cuphead escaped. Finally, much like Mugman, Kettle has 4 cases of attempted murder, 1 on Werner Werman, 1 on the Root Pack when he tried to eat them, and 2 on both Cuphead and Mugman. After careful review, we've decided that Kettle is a menace to society and has been since youth. But despite this, he doesn't seem to have much time left, so we place him with the rest of his life in prison. His list of crimes is much less than the others we've discussed so far, but he does have a fair few violent crimes dotting this list, and this is without knowing much about his past. The heavy hitters have arrived, so why don't we discuss sentencing with our villains? We've moved into the first villain on our docket, the Devil. The Devil is undoubtedly the main antagonist of the show, and he has a pretty varied list of crimes, even if it's shorter than that of Cuphead and Mugman as far as we know. Amongst his many crimes are 1 assault with a deadly weapon, 1 petty theft, 1 disturbing the peace, and 1 reckless endangerment. These mostly come from his crime spree, such as stealing candy from a child in the intro song, attacking the cups with his pitchfork, and nearly killing henchmen with a blast from his pitchfork. He also harasses Cuphead whilst wearing the sweater, which constitutes a different charge. He also has 3 different cases for arson of property, usually from blowing up in anger. He has quite a few unique crimes under his belt, such as abuse of employee, unlawful release of zoo animals, and bribery. Amongst these many unique crimes include running a rigged game show, which counts as rigging a game in California and therefore its own crime. However, he has 3 pretty large crimes we need to talk about. Firstly are his 21 cases of involuntary manslaughter, mostly from when he kills his finest and second finest demons.
I want to obliterate all of you.
Then we have his millions of cases of murder, mostly from causing wars, famine, and gluttony, which of course harms and kills millions. But finally, we mulled it over and have decided to claim his soul stealing as assault. Because no one dies from a lack of soul, but it would still be an assault of some sort. And he has around 6.3 billion cases of that. So, with all of that discussed, we've decided that the Devil deserves the death penalty, likely through the use of holy water and electric chair. The Devil is scarily evil and has done enough crimes to fill many rap sheets, but only if you separate each of his assaults and murders out. Even then, he's a threat to humanity, no doubt. Next on the docket is the Devil's number 1, none other than King Dice. King Dice is supposedly the Devil's number 1 henchman, and as such, he's likely done a lot we haven't seen. But what we have seen is pretty incriminating. Not only is he the one who helms and runs the game show that we know is pretty much rigged, and there's a case for intent to bodily harm when he prepares to attack Cuphead for failing to win the game. He also has at least 1 assault case under his belt, because we're counting on the trend that stealing souls is assault, and he takes the telephone soul in his debut. However, it can be assumed, based on the fact that the game show is well known and many people's favorite, that he'd have plenty more. However, where most of the problems arise is Season 2, Episode 8, Release the Demons, where he racks up a bevy of crimes under his belt. These include accessory to murder, solicitation to commit a crime of violence, voluntary manslaughter, and 3 murders, as well as an attempted kidnapping. Each of these crimes show that Dice is violent and untrustworthy, which makes sense considering he's in league with the Devil. So, we've decided, like his boss, he should get the death penalty. Due to it being industry standard at the time, the electric chair works fine. The best defense Dice has would be that if he didn't commit these murders, he'd be killed. And while being under duress like that would absolve some of the blame, his other crimes would not be absolved. A much smaller criminal in this racket, Stickler is the next one on trial. Stickler is an interesting one because, much like some of the others, his crimes are likely much more than we know. But as we see in the show, he is the auditor for Hell's Souls, and this means one major thing. He is a major part of the Devil's Assault. One could haggle it down to him being just an accessory, but he is very often trying to convince the devil to collect all the souls necessary. So, one could say he is a perpetrator in the Devil's Assaults, as well as his harassment and attempted assault of Cuphead. Because of this, we've decided that Stickler should be put in prison for the rest of his natural life with no chance at parole. Stickler may not be as active with crimes as others, but he is responsible enough that he should never be out of prison. The final major villain we need to speak about is Henchmen. Henchmen is one of the Devil's highest ranking employees and one of the few that we can actually prosecute. So, his crimes are as follows. He is a criminal accessory to all 6.3 billion cases of the Devil's Assault when it comes to stealing souls, as he not only watched the counter but informed the devil when it stopped counting. He is also the one who runs the rigged game show Roll the Dice after King Dice loses against Cuphead, which means he would be incriminated for that as well. He is also an accessory to the kidnapping of Mugman at the end of Season 2, which is another crime on the list. However, his worst crime is actually the incitement of all the Devil's crime in the final episode, which means he would be partially responsible. So we actually have to give him a very similar punishment to that of the devil: the death penalty via drinking holy water and or execution from the electric chair. Unlike Stickler, we can actively point out that he is responsible for certain things the devil did, hence why we feel he needs to die just as much as his boss. Finally, we have a few others to discuss. Let's get to sentencing the others. The first one on the docket in this section is the Boar's Boar broker, Porkrind. Porkrind is the shopkeep of Porkrind's Emporium on Inkwell Isle, where he plays a pretty pertinent role in a few episodes of Season 1. In Episode 4, when Mugman breaks his handle, Cuphead and Mugman go to buy some glue, and this is where his first few crimes come to a head. He technically meets a legal definition of extortion when he tries to force more money out of Mugman and Cuphead just to get glue.
Gonna be real expensive then.
He is also implied to be illegally betting on dog races during his first appearance. Back to the extortion line. He's also responsible for criminal price gouging for the same reason as the extortion. Finally, in his second appearance, he is both selling illegal and dangerous weapons as well as operating as a black market, seemingly without a license, which is highly illegal. Porkrind manages to get by on the fact that most of his crimes are not really violent. But when the black market stuff comes to light, we have to sentence him to at least 25 years in prison without parole. Now, this is based purely on the crimes we know about. Porkrind may have done terrible things and we may never know, but as it stands, this feels like the best punishment, at least at the moment. Up next on our docket is a combined trial, that of Ribby and Croaks. Ribby and Croaks are brothers, ex-boxers, and business owners we meet in the third episode, where they commit a variety of crimes in the short amount of time on screen. Firstly, Croaks routinely makes threats of assault to just about everybody they meet, which, while only a misdemeanor, is still a crime. They committed petty theft followed by assault when they stole the Cup's $5 and then physically kicked them out into the water. Croaks then commits two separate but similar acts of employee abuse when he uses the Firefly against their will to heat a vent and then fire at the Cup brothers. Finally, their worst crime is undoubtedly the manslaughter of 10 people, including a government official. Whilst fighting Cuphead and Mugman, they punch holes into their own boat, which causes it to sink and kill most of the people inside. Ribby and Croaks aren't really all that bad, all things considered, especially compared to others. But that doesn't mean they get off scot-free. 10 manslaughters is a lot, and we are sentencing them to life in prison with a chance of parole because it's not likely they intentionally killed everyone. However, while they committed other would-be crimes, most of it happened while trying to protect their property and their boat, which would be considered legal if tried under the self-defense and/or castle doctrine. So we didn't include those attacks on the cups. Another group is next up on our docket, being the Root Pack. Much like Ribby and Croaks, they only appear in one episode and they rack up a few crimes in that time. Firstly, they show up by trespassing on the Elder Kettle's property, which already sets them up as criminals to some degree. They also seem to have scammed people in the past, but we can't confirm. Then, they throw the giant party without permission, which likely would be classified under making too much noise from a noise complaint of some kind, as well as disturbing the peace, both of which are quite low-level crimes. The highest crime we think we could get them for is actually murder. And this is kind of a weird one, so stick with us here. The Root Pack and its party guests are all giant plants. This is obvious. Some of these plants have crossover with the plants that Elder Kettle is growing. So, when absorbing the water from the soil and killing the plants, does that mean they murdered those plants? And does that mean they killed babies?
They're killing Elder Kettle's babies!
However, we aren't going to be prosecuting them on this simply because a lot of sentient objects have non-sentient counterparts, and we assume this is the case for the plants. With that in mind, we sentence the Root Pack to a long sentence of community service to pay back the debts they owe for what they did. Nothing they did is particularly violent or even jail-worthy, so we don't believe they should be put in prison for such petty crimes. The final criminal on our docket is Bullboy, who no one wants to be. Bullboy pops up in Season 1, but doesn't really have anything to talk about until Season 2, when he pops up in the episode Another Brother. He starts off strong by attempting to murder Cuphead, committing involuntary manslaughter, and then knocking a driver out with a sleep dart, which would be assault with a deadly weapon and reckless endangerment. He also mentions he wants to become Cuphead, which implies he planned to try and steal Cuphead's identity. So even if it's just criminal conspiracy, that's still worth mentioning. However, what really gets him a lot of time is the final scene, where he adds 4 more implied crimes to his rap sheet. These are practicing medicine without a license, torture, medical malpractice, and poisoning. These are all violent crimes that prove that Bullboy is a menace. And even though they're not on screen, it's obvious they happened. With all of this in mind, we've decided to sentence Bullboy to execution. The electric chair gets a lot of use on his big head, but it's still very necessary because he'd likely continue to do this. Bullboy doesn't have any excuses, and he won't be getting off any of these crimes despite his crazed nature. But let us know in the comment section if you agree with our list, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos. But most importantly, stay wicked.